Peace, family. This is Dr. Kia Pruitt. It's Tuesday, October the 25th, 2022, and the time is 1:07 p.m. Earlier today, I interviewed the CEO of Miles Franklin Precious Metals Company. His name is Andy Schekman, and that was a fantastic interview. So I don't know which, of my channels you're following me on today, but I have two channels. That's the Mama Kia channel, and then I have another channel that is about Intel, precious metals, and what's going on in the geopolitical arena. That YouTube channel is simply called Dr. Kia Pruitt. So you're going to hear that interview on my Dr. Kia Pruitt channel with Mr. Andy Schekman. He has been in business for 33 years. And his business is registered with the Better Business Bureau. They have an A+ rating, and they have not had one single complaint. They are approaching $8 billion worth of sales in all the time that they've been doing business. And Mr. Schekman is one of only a few companies that is registered with the U.S. Mint to distribute their products. So I'm so thrilled and honored to be able to bring to you all that wonderful information and a beautiful, beautiful interview. We discussed the United States history of having the reserve currency of the world and how country after country have left the United States dollar, and we talked about the implications of that. So Mr. Schekman has told me that the implications of that, losing the world reserve status, is that now the money or the dollars will flood back into our country, and it will become, just domestic, only used domestically, which will cause high inflation and a significant devaluing of the United States dollar. So he goes on to tell us how we can prepare and what we need to do in order to make sure that our families are okay in the future. Now, when I taped that, of course, I was in the mode of talking about geopolitics and economics and how we as a nation can prepare for the future. But after that interview, I had spoken to someone about the issue that we have, or issues that we have in the family classified as Black, and really in a lot of families here in America. And I'm often talking about how women can contribute to keeping our marriages together, and how women can contribute to, getting just having a great relationship with men. So one of the ladies with whom I spoke said, it's good to talk to the women and tell us not to be so aggressive, and how to be more cooperative and even yielding to men, because men are leaders. And if men lead, they need cooperation. They don't need pushback and fighting and all that type of thing. So she said, keep in mind that there were systems put in place to destroy the family unit, and that I need to talk about that. So as I was thinking about that, I happened upon some videos, and I was reflecting on my own life to see how relevant that information is, or her point was. So I thought, well, as I did some reflection, I started to think about what happened in my own community and in my own life. What I saw growing up in the 1970s and 80s was that my grandparents were doing well. My grandparents, particularly my paternal grandparents, have been business owners. They were land owners. They owned their home. They had an intact family. And as children, as the grandchildren, we love being with grandfather and grandma. And then on my mom's side, although my grandparents struggled when I was growing up, the story is that at least when I was younger, they were married. And even though they were having some financial challenges, my grandfather, my maternal grandfather, actually was in law enforcement. I think he was a police officer, or maybe even a sheriff of some sort, but he was in law enforcement, and he was doing pretty well. And then my mom's grandfather, my great-grandfather, my maternal great-grandfather, was in his earlier days, he was a bootlegger, which means that he unlawfully sold alcohol. He made it and he sold it, and they called it moonshine back then. And he's actually from Colombia. He came over here to America. He had these unlawful businesses or illegal businesses at the time, and then he eventually went legitimate and started working for, I don't know if it was the railroad or the brickyard, one of the two. But he had lots of property, my maternal great-grandfather, lots of land, and did well financially. And as a matter of fact, he is the first person that actually introduced me by way of his death to precious metals. So my great-grandfather, Manuel Gomez, from Colombia, actually lived in Ohio because he had come here in, I think, in his early 20s and married a woman from the Blackfoot tribe, married a woman, Janie Hawshaw, right off of the reservation. And you know, he did all right. But once he got in trouble for selling moonshine, they took his children, my grandmother and my great uncle, away from him and his wife, and put them in an orphanage. And when they lived in the orphanage, they were abused, they were molested, they were mistreated. And the story is that my maternal grandmother actually ran away from the home and found the orphanage and found her brother, and then they escaped and figured out a way to live until she found her parents, or her father, which was my great-grandfather, in Portsmouth, Ohio. So she left Cleveland, Ohio, got her brother, and then escaped and lived in Cleveland, Ohio for some time, and then moved into my great-grandfather's home in Portsmouth, Ohio. So to make a long story short, I just want to say my great-grandparents did all right, even if they were participating in the underground economy, selling moonshine on my mom's side. And on my dad's side, I just know they were tribal peoples. And then my grandparents on my dad's side, they had businesses. They owned a sausage business. They were part owners of a sausage business. They owned a storefront, so they had a store connected to their house, and they did well. And they owned their own home. They had gardens. They had 10 children, and they did relatively well. After that, what I noticed was during the 70s, there was a pandemic of heroin pushed into the black community, or certain communities, particular communities classified as black. And my father was one of the people that got addicted to heroin when he tried it one time as a teenager, and eventually became so involved in taking drugs and heroin that he was not there for me most of my life. So when I wanted to visit him, I had to go to the prison to visit him. As children, my brother and I have been to every single prison in Ohio because my dad was taken from prison to prison. Now, I am not excusing my dad's behavior. I'm not excusing anybody's behavior. I'm just telling a story about how when drugs were put into the community, some people got addicted. And my father came from an intact home with 2 parents, business owners, landowners, traditional marriage. My grandmother was a submissive, yielding wife. She supported her husband and his businesses. She was happy as far as I knew. Everybody said she was a good woman. She was a happy woman. She was a joyous woman. And that's where I get my personality from. My joyous personality. And she raised her family and successfully. But my dad got involved in drugs, and so did many people in the community. Now that generation struggled, because they didn't get married, some of them. And if they did, they had issues because the father was addicted to drugs. And at the same time, they introduced welfare to either entice women to separate from their husbands and take governmental handouts, or to just supplement whatever was coming on in the home, and encourage the men to leave the home because you could not have a man in the house if you received those government handouts. Now, I've always wondered, why did the women take government handouts? Because just because they offer it to you don't mean you have to take it. Some of them took it because they wanted a free handout. I'm just going to be honest, just like most people will take a free handout. Some of them did it out of necessity, because their husbands or babies' fathers were addicted to drugs. And then some of them just took it because it put them in a position actually to not have to be submissive to their husbands. Now, this is coming from my observations and actually interviewing people when I became older to ask them, why did you all receive those handouts if you're telling me that the government introducing free handouts, welfare, public aid, Section 8 type housing allowances, if they offered them, why did you take them? You know, you didn't have to take them, right? So again, it was some out of necessity and some because, you know, they wanted that extra money. So the government has always done things to be in cahoots with the woman to encourage her to separate from her husband in order to break up the family. So I don't want to put the onus only on the woman, of course, because the men did not have to take the drugs. And then, so you had the drugs in the 70s being heroin, and then the 80s, there was a crack epidemic in the Black community and in some other communities, but specifically the community classified as Black. Why? Because people who are classified as Black, we are actually the Aboriginal people, or ab just means from. People will tell you it means against. That was later on, but it originally meant, when you do the etymology of ab, it means from. We are the people from the land. We are the indigenous or the original people from America or Amorica or the North Gates or Northwest Africa, Turtle Island, however you want to call it, America. We are the original indigenous people. So you have to enslave those people, keep their children miseducated, their parents on drugs, and help them forget who they are. Tell them they're Negroes or niggers or coloreds or Blacks or African Americans that came on some slave ship from Africa and were enslaved here in the Americas, so that they can forget that this is their land and their land will become easier to steal. Then you had people that look, the Mongoloid or Asiatic people or Asian people that came from Asia across the Bering Strait here in America, who became known as the Native Americans. They are not the original people here. They are the people masquerading as us, they and our mixed children. And what we did was we did mix with them, marry them, and produce children. But the people classified as Black were the ones that these people who enslaved the planet and who took over America and our republic, which was our lawful government. And this is something that they did to enslave us and to steal our land and to further isolate us from our heritage, our land, and our history or herstory. So you had the crack epidemic of the 80s, and the crack epidemic of the 80s was horrendous in a community classified as Black, because now you had the children of those who were addicted to heroin trying to figure out life. At the same time, in the school system, they took out SHOP. SHOP gave men a way to learn how to build things, how to make things, because men are builders. They create infrastructures. They build homes. You know, that is their task, their job here on earth. So you took out SHOP, you took out drafting, you took out vocational schools out of the community, and even vocational classes. Simultaneously, these people empower these bloodline families that came from beings that came from other realities and other realms, took out home economics so that the woman would no longer learn how to cook or how to clean or how to sew or how to do the things that would help her to be the domestic goddesses that we used to be. And not just the Black community, they did this all over for every community. But remember, there was a specific agenda to target the Aboriginal people of the land so that you can confuse them and take over the land and make it your own. Now, this is not the colonists per se that came here. It's a faction of them that are connected to the bloodline families of these beings that came from other realms, from other realms to usurp authority and enslave humanity. Because the Moors, or the people that were part of the Moroccan Empire, made up of all the different tribes or tribal peoples here in America, actually welcomed some of the colonists to come here and do business with us, or even to just do business on the land, and we recognize them as their own nation. Those people are called the United States of Amorica or America. They were the United States. We recognized them and allowed them to come here, and the red, white, and blue flag is their flag, or their banner of trade and commerce. The Moorish American flag is actually, or the Moorish flag, or the indigenous flag, was actually a red flag with a green star. So this is why in the White House you would have the Moor flag, the flag of the Moors, next to the red, white, and blue flag, which is the flag of the United States of America, or those colonists that we allowed to come here. It's important to note that the colonists who came here were actually running from the British, whom some people said were the brutish Moors or the British Moors. So they came here to escape whatever they were going through over there. Now, I've heard many stories about the brutish Moors being Moors or brown people who actually had their empire in Britain and other places in Europe, because the Moroccan Empire actually was massive. So I believe those brutish Moors or the people in Britain probably were our cousins, but I don't know for sure. Anyway, so the colonists were allowed to come here. We have many treaties, and one of which is called the Treaty of Peace and Friendship. So it's not them. I don't want us to talk about white people or Caucasian people as if they were evil. Please understand and overstand that they were a group of beings that came from other realms, okay, or other realities here on this planet to usurp authority because they were jealous of us. And because we were left by our creators and to figure out a way, and we were supposed to ascend in consciousness. But instead what happened was you had these other beings that come here, enslave us, and cause confusion, and their bloodline or their children with whom they mated. Remember, the scripture talks about the Nephilim, which were the sons of God mating with the daughters of men, or they were the sons of these other creatures or beings that came from other realities. They mated with the women here. Their bloodline families are the ones, they and their overlords are the ones that enslaved the Aboriginal or indigenous people here. So they had to attack our families. And so you had the heroin epidemic, you had the crack epidemic, you had the schools taking out shop and taking out home economics, and you had schools lying to us and teaching us that false narrative that we came from Africa as slaves here in America, and then we became chattel slaves here. Now, there is some truth about us becoming chattel slaves, but there's also truth about us actually becoming indentured servants here in America. What people won't tell you is that the Caucasian people or colonists that came here, some of them were actually enslaved. So people classified as white here in America were the first slaves. That's where you get the word Slavic from. Let me also bring to your attention that black is a status. It is not an ethnicity, a nationality, or a race. Race is an economic term that actually means a race to resources, making a run, trying to be the first to gather all the resources for yourself and your posterity. It has nothing to do with bloodline, or little to do with bloodline, but nothing to do with color, complexion, ethnicity, or nationality. So black was a status. It actually means bleak, blank, void, pale, okay, no, void of color, and later came to mean slave. Black was a status that was applied to the colonists who came over here in America, and white was the status that was applied to the Moors or the indigenous Aboriginal people, people who look like me, copper-colored people here in America. White is our status. Black was their status. Everything you've been taught is in reverse, it's backwards, it's wrong, and it's in error. Now, let's pause here to talk about the 1828 Webster's definition of American. The 1828 Webster's definition of American is the copper-colored people, copper-colored people found here in America by Christopher Columbus, but now applied to Europeans. And then it goes on to say we're all Americans. So the reason why it's important to know the original definition of American is because it will help you to understand and overstand that the copper-colored people here did not come from Africa. That is a lie. There were no slave ships where the people in Africa sold their own people here to America, and they will tell you that to this day. What actually happened is, yes, they were participated in slavery, but some of us were enslaved here in America, and some of us were captured or rounded up here in America, sold into Africa as slaves, and then brought back and reclassified as African slaves. But notice you cannot find any slave ships, that you will only see drawings. Now, Alex Haley became very famous and popular when he came out with that movie called Roots, and he talked about in that movie how his people came from Africa, they were enslaved, they went through being beaten, etc., etc. It was a very sad story. It became popular, and it was one of the stories that helped Hollywood to push forth this narrative that the copper-colored people here are from Africa or African slaves. Now, there's a book that you need to read called, it was written by, I can't think of it, but it's called They Came Before Columbus. You all know that, some of you will know who that, Van Sertima, Ivan Van Sertima. He's a copper-colored brother, or brother classified as black here. He's talked about how we were always here, that we were here before Christopher Columbus, that some of us had actually come from different parts of the world here. But now when you look at the video that I created about the ancient biblical map that was released recently, you will see in that ancient biblical map that America is actually the cradle of civilization, that the Garden of Eden is here, that Israel is here, Egypt is here, all of that. And when you listen to Bix Weir talk about all the gold that's stored over in the Grand Canyon and the pyramids and artifacts and all that, you know that this is Egypt. So having said that, family, Hollywood lied. The school system lied. The school system told us we were Africans that came over here and became chattel slaves. And, you know, what that did for us was disconnected us from the land. But our families have always told us, you got Indian in your family, you're Cherokee, you're Blackfoot, you are Senecan, you are, what else, Iroquois, and all those other things. But once when they separate us from our homes, from being homeschooled, and from our private schools that we had when we were segregated, and the segregation wasn't even something that was a horrible thing back then. It was just that we were on our own land, and people that came to visit or came to do commerce and businesses, they had their own colonies, they had their own nation. And that's why Donald Trump said Morocco was the first to recognize us as our own nation. That's why George Washington paid homage to the Emperor of the Moors. He paid homage, he paid a tribute to him, because they were thanking us, or thanking my ancestors, for allowing them to be here on the land. You have to listen intently when these people talk. So the schools were in cahoots with the bloodline families, because they were the same people, in cahoots with the government, or the United States Corporation, which overtook our government, which is the Republic, and taught us lies. So when you separate the children from their parents, you can teach them whatever it is you desire. And even though our parents said these people were lying, we believed them. Now, Alex Haley and Hollywood continue to come out with these stories, or Alex Haley did, and then Hollywood perpetuates slavery stories all the time to perpetuate the lie and keep it going. But family, it's just simply not true. In fact, Alex Haley was sued by Harold Corlander, which is a Caucasian gentleman who wrote a book called The African. Harold Corlander sued Alex Haley for plagiarism because he said Alex Haley stole his characters, and said that these characters were Alex Haley's family members who were enslaved, or who are either in Africa and sold slaves, or they were, and some of them became the children of the slaves who became chattel property here in America. He sued Alex Haley and won his case. The case was settled, and Alex Haley now, you know, even though he goes down in history as being the one to perpetuate the story about slavery, he lost his case, and you don't hear about it. So fast forward, what you see is our land being stolen from us. Our women have been taken out of the home. I'm sorry, women were actually given money, food stamps, what else you call welfare benefits, housing allowances, while the men were strung out on drugs, so they could not provide. Okay, then fast forward, they took out shops from the schools, they took out home economics, and then they had, after the heroin epidemic, they had the crack epidemic. You see how it happened? And then they came up with feminism. Feminism was this so-called women's empowerment movement that somehow funneled into the community classified as black, or into the copper-colored people community. But feminism that came up with I think it was Margaret Sanger, who was a so-called white supremacist. I don't even like using that because I think it's an oxymoron. First of all, white was the classification or the status of Moors, but anyway, and the people who were using this paradigm in order to tell indigenous people or aboriginal people that they are worthless. They're not superior to anybody. Nobody's superior to more superior than the next. You see how they put in these divisive programs in order to harm us so that they can take over humanity and the entire planet. So Margaret Sanger was a so-called white supremacist, and she was part of their agenda. I'm not even sure if she was a woman. She could have been a man for all I know with this transgender agenda. She was a proponent of abortion, which is the #1 way that people classified as black are murdered through abortion. So this feminism argument was actually an argument that Caucasian women had because they had a gripe against the system, which allowed so-called black men to vote before they could even vote, right? But and so they had an issue with that, and they felt like they didn't have power in their homes, and they were angry with their men. But even that was an agenda to get Caucasian women to fight against their men, because it wasn't their men who had created white supremacy. It wasn't their men who had created what they called unhealthy patriotism, or I'm sorry, unhealthy patriarchy, but it was the system. It was a group of beings and their hybrids that created the system. So what they did was they got into the heads of the women, the Caucasian women, and said, you have a gripe against your man. It's your issue. Now you have to take it to the streets, burn your bras, which now I'm hearing they're burning hijabs in the Middle East. And I think that's an agenda to upset the women, incense the women, and get them out of the homes. Now, to feel like you're enslaved is one thing, but I don't know if there's an agenda behind that. But here in America, they start burning bras. They start telling women you're equal to men, that you can smoke cigarettes now. And they came up with these commercials that said, you've come a long way, baby, with Virginia Slims and the women smoking cigarettes, and particularly Caucasian women. Then they came up with these commercials that said, I can bring home the bacon, fry it up in a pan, and never, ever, ever let you forget you're a man, 'cause I'm a woman. Ajali. And Ajali is a perfume commercial. What does perfume have to do with feminism and women being now equal to men? You see how they do? Now, I believe women have their own rights and their own power and strength, and men have theirs. I believe that you are your own being as a man, and you have certain things that you ought to do in order to keep the family and community running, like build, provide, and protect. And women, at least historically, kept the home as gatherers. The men are the hunters. We are the gatherers. We are the caretakers of the home, the husbands and the families. But now they're telling you, or then throughout history, you're equal to a man because the man has oppressed you, and you need to fight against him. So this feminism agenda got into the heads of the Caucasian women, and the Caucasian women, according to my history, and you all can correct me or add to the discussion in the comment section. The women wanted to vote. They wanted to come out the house and work. They wanted to smoke cigarettes so they can get cancer like men. That's why I see it. They wanted to work and exhaust themselves like men and be separate now from their children, and let the school system raise the children and indoctrinate them and program them. See how that worked? But they didn't know, the women didn't know that this was an agenda. So then they came into the community classified as black and said, hey, you guys got a problem with your men too. But from my understanding and overstanding, doing my research and talking to my grandparents and other people and interviewing people, we didn't have a problem with our men. Not the ones that were at home taking care of business. We didn't have a problem with them, but we jumped on board with the feminism movement. We started working just like the men. We started joining the armed forces. We started having abortions. We started just doing things that were the antithesis of being a communal people and a people that had pride in being an American and pride in being family oriented. So all these things happen in order to bring about discord in the family, in the Caucasian family, and the indigenous family, Aboriginal family, every family in America. And that sickness and illness spread out through the world. Now, the people classified as black are the Aboriginal people, the original people that the United Nations called in the 1990s the oldest indigenous people on the planet. And when you understand and overstand that we've always been here, and you understand and overstand that this is actually Israel and Egypt and the cradle of civilization, it makes sense that we are the oldest indigenous or oldest original people on the planet. So again, those bloodline families had to come after us first and completely annihilate us so that they can then put the Caucasian people, our Caucasian brothers and sisters, in a position so they can then go after them. So it was all a plot to take over all of us. Start with the Aboriginal people, okay, and then go for then you suppress them as much as you can, enslave them as much as you can, disarm them, and cause harmony and wreak havoc in their communities as much as you can. Then you go after the brothers and sisters that we had allowed and welcomed here on our land, because the whole plan was to enslave us all. Now, we were classified as the Aboriginal people, and then indigenous people, and then the Indians or Native Americans here, because again, we did mate with the people that came over the Bering Strait that are from Asia, and we created, we had a whole different bloodline. I'm sorry, it's both of our bloodlines connected, so we became family. But so we were Aboriginal, then they changed our designation to I think indigenous or Indian, and then they changed our designation to our classification to colored, and then to Negro, and then to black, and then they commissioned Jesse Jackson to come up with the title for us called African American to further confuse us. So all these people are agents. Jesse Jackson is an FBI agent. I think most people know that now, or CIA. And they also created a segment of the CIA and FBI to come into our communities to study us, to find out how to get us addicted to drugs, to find out how to create music that would keep us vibrating at our lowest chakra. So that's why you hear music in the black community talk about drugs, violence, hating women, sexing women, hoeing, thotting, screwing, and all that stuff that leads to violence and being low vibrational beings. So they did it to us, and they did it to our Caucasian brothers and sisters as well, in order to enslave us. So now what we see with all this programming in our communities, we see the so-called black family being in disarray. Now, some of my relatives actually had when you look at their birth certificate, it actually tells you that they were landowners. So none of us were slaves. So it's important for everybody to look at their own personal records and to talk to their ancestors that are still living. I'm sorry, their elders that are still living, and find out. I got to call, my son is calling me. He's editing a video. Who we really are. Again, family, this was a plot to separate the family. So now you see women and men fighting. You see women trying to be like Cardi B and Meg Thee Stallion, all these thoughts who might not even be female, they might be male, talking about screwing and hoeing and thotting and hating men and being evil. And you have the men trying to be like thugs and criminals and crooks, whether they trying to mimic the artist or mimic what they see on television in the movies. And so now we have disharmony in the home. We have high crime rates. We see our children killing each other in the streets. We have a breakdown in marriage. We have 77% or more of our homes being headed by women, which is an atrocity, because now women have to go out and work. And now, because they've had to figure out throughout generations how to take care of themselves once the man was displaced from the home, whether he was on drugs or in jail. Now she's bitter, she's angry, she feels unprotected, so she's defensive, and then she has taught that language and that behavior to her daughters to mistreat her men and hate her men. And the men, through the music and the low vibrations from being on drugs, have learned to be disrespectful to the women. So what we see today, it is all this programming playing out. So my encouragement to you, family, is to learn the history about what happened, not to be angry, not to blame anybody, not to hate anybody, but you have to take accountability for either accepting handouts or participating with the government, or even just taking on the identities because of our program. You have to take accountability. We have to take accountability, and we have to own it in terms of saying, yes, I did this, or yes, this happened in my community, but now I'm going to ask for forgiveness from the Creator, from my ancestors, and even from my mate, or the men or women by whom I've had children, and heal as a community, as a family, and as a nation. If each person takes it upon themselves to do that, to take accountability for anything that you've done that is wrong, that is off, that is not encouraged, that is unwise, take accountability for it. Acknowledge it. Go to the people that you need to and apologize, and then come to the table and decide what you need to do to make it better. And that is how we will create strong families, strong communities, and a strong nation, and a strong, healthy world. My name is Dr. Kia Pruitt. I've taken up enough of your time. It's 35 minutes and 48 seconds. I hope I've said something to cause you to think, to raise your vibrations, and to help you create the beautiful, magnificent world that you so greatly desire and deserve. Go out today and make it great. Peace.